This is a video tutorial, but you can just use the pop-up guides to guide you through the process of creating a web API project in Visual Studio. So it says click on the search bar, search in the taskbar, and paste in the pop-up guide, which is a WPF application that I wrote, has put something in your clipboard, and you just Control V to paste it in that, and this will help you to get Visual Studio started. If it's installed, if it's not installed, then you would want to, of course, install it. So while that's loading, it's already loaded now, but let's give a quick discussion of what a web API is. It's just a when you want to share a set of actions across several applications, your mobile app or your browser app, then you would use a web API to not have to write that code over and over again. And what they have is something called content negotiation, and you just put this code in the header, and you tell it how you want to send your request to the web API and what kind of format you expect it back. So I'm saying I want to send my request with JSON and get it back in JSON, which is a language that just has brackets in it. And then you can do it in many different ways. This is content negotiation. You can say, I need it in XML format by putting that in your content header when you in your browser. So if you did that, it would come back as XML. And if you said you wanted it, I'm sending JSON, but I want it in XML format, you do it this way, and so forth. This is the goal of this little video or this pop-up guide demo, is to just have uh, uh, be in the browser and enter this in the URL, and it'll go out to the web API and go into the controller for the values controller and pull back a list of hard-coded strings of values. So once this screen pops up, your first step is to says click on create new project. So we do that. And then this will create a list of all your recent projects and all the templates that are available. You haven't specified what you're trying to uh, what you're trying to which type of application you want to use for a template. So that's what we're doing now. So when you start, it says all languages. We want to narrow this down to be C-sharp languages. So it says select language C-sharp, which I did. And then for the templates, we're going to enter the template, put it in the clipboard for you like it did in the taskbar for the search icon. So you just put that in there and click OK. So now we're narrowing it down to a particular type of template, and we're going to use a web application. Could use Core, but we're just using ASP.NET. Click that. Click OK. And then it wants us to create a name for it. Since I'm just calling it Web API demo, so I put that in the clipboard. It says create, and this is going to start spinning up the application itself from that template. It's going to auto-generate the source code. But first we have to specify one more thing that we want to be Web API project. So when I click on this, it's going to select MVC and Web API to auto-generate some code for us. You can do more things here, but for now we're just going to do what the instruction says. Create. This will take a while to spin up. So in that time, I want to look at the Solution Explorer for what it's going to generate. And what it's going to generate is a structure that's familiar to you if you've used MVC before. You get your controllers, your models, and your views. Your controllers hold the actions that you want to do. The models hold the data, and the views hold your screen layout. That's all familiar to you. Should be in the App Start folder. Contains a bunch of configuration files. And the global ASX file has a start event, application start event that registers that configuration that you've set up. So we'll look at that when this spins up. Takes a little while, so you might want to get a cup of coffee. I'll pause it. Okay, great. It's spun up the source code that it generated. And then the next thing we need to do, we want to look at this. It says click on the arrow next to the controllers folder to expand it. We'll do that. This is the Solution Explorer information that we were looking at before it spun up. And it says click on the values controller to view the code. So we'll do that. The recording causes that black thing to appear every once in a while because it slows down my computer a little bit, but that normally wouldn't appear. So now we're notice that the values controller inherits from this column means inherits from a base class called API controller, on the which is in the namespace of HTTP. Now, for the notice that the values controller inherits from the API controller that is present in the HTTP namespace. This is different from the MVC controller. The MVC controller inherits from the controller class that is present in the MVC namespace. So it could be a little confusing, but we'll try and clarify it. The home controller class is an MVC controller and inherits from the controller class. So let's try to clarify this a little bit better. So we have for API, you have these different namespaces than for MVC. They inherit from different controller, and so we're talking about two different things. The web API is in the values controller, and the home controller is just a regular MVC controller that will display the home page. So this has a view, this does not really have a view. It's used to retrieve information for other pages. Hopefully that helps. This shows how, so we have a web API controller. This is our values controller. We could have another controller that MVC project that had a view that was using that Web API values controller. We don't in this case, but and you could attach to a database. Now we want to collapse this to the definitions. So you right click anywhere in the code window, go to outlining, say collapse to definitions. When you do that, you see these various methods that correspond to the HTTP verbs. Get, post, put. These are HTTP verbs, but they are methods in this thing. So if you do a get, there's two options. You can have it with an ID or without an ID. And depending on that determines which method gets called when you execute a HTTP verb. So this just says what I just said, that the values controller has these methods that map to the verbs. And we have two overloaded versions of the get method, one without any parameters. This is the one without any parameters. If you just say values, that's the one we're going to do in this exercise. It'll just return everything in the array that they've hard-coded. And if you say get with an ID, it will return the individual ID that you asked for. So this is what it's going to return when we just, it default, when you have the get verb, that's the one that gets executed by default. So the next step is to look at the routing. How does a URL get connected to this action method? It's Web API action method. So it says click on the global ASX file to see the source code there, and that's where the routing, it tells you which configuration value is for the routing. So okay there. And so this application start event is fired when the application starts, and the in this we have the configuration for filters, routes. These are for the MVC, and these are for the API, two different things. So we're interested in the configuration for the Web API. We're going to do stuff with the values controller, which is a Web API. So it says right click on this and drill down to see how this routing is configured. So go to definition. When you go to the definition, you see that this shows the default route. So we have a default route. Web APIs are different from MVC routes. So you see over here we have the Web API config and the route config. Over here is for the MVC. This is for the Web API. And to do the default route, it has to always start with the API, and then whichever controller you put in there, it'll this is a variable, and you have an optional ID that you can add onto it. Okay, now we want to start it up in IIS, run the program, run the Web API, get it hosted in IIS, and then we'll use a browser to retrieve those values. this will take a while to spin up. It could be time for another cup of coffee. So here's a kind of an overview of how the IIS will be the hosting server. We'll be on the browser. We'll send a request. We'll enter this URL as it be API values. That'll go in and that'll send it off to our web API controller and our values controller, and it'll go to the get method. And it'll return that array of values back to the API controller app, and from that app it will send the response back to the IIS, and IIS sends it back to the client. So it has actually already spun up the application, which is pretty good. Not totally, but it's got the URL there. I may pause it while it finishes spinning up. So it's up on the application completely now, and so this is what the home controller is delivered to the page. But we're interested in is that values controller. So it says just add API/values, and it'll default to using the get method, since we're doing a get under API/values. I'll leave that port number on there after localhost because that's the instance of what we're using. And there it comes back with what we were expecting, the return that array of values from the values controller. Thanks.